I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Capella University is rethinking higher education. With its game-changing FlexPath learning format, you can earn your degree on your schedule and fit your education seamlessly into your life. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
James Buchanan was the president before Abraham Lincoln. People should know because A, he was one of the most important people in the world. B, certainly the Civil War was critical on who was the president, right?
And what made you bring it up in your comedy routine?
Because I was making a joke about how everybody always wants to know what their purpose in life is. So here's a guy who must have, from an early age, thought his purpose in life was to lead one of the most important countries in the world. And he achieved his dream. He achieved his goals in life. He became everyone, when they little kids, like, I'm going to be president of the United States. He did it. He was the one little kid who grew up and became president of the United States of America. And now nobody, 150 years later,
interesting.
Not a single person knew his name. And so what my point there was, and I was telling a joke about my daughter asking me, how do I find my purpose in life? My point to her was, just be happy. Because here's a guy who had a purpose, achieved his dreams, achieved his passions, achieved his goals, and nobody knew who he was anymore.
Yeah.
So another episode, it's a Q&A episode with me and Steve Cohen.
Hi.
How's it going,
Good,
Steve?
thank you. That's fair.
Trying to think, last time we started off with talking about the Google Maps stuff.
Yeah. Well, last time I feel like, it was like that joke, like you asked me what time it is and I told you how to make a watch, so we digressed. We covered a lot of ground and I thought
all right, let's go right into the questions then.
Fine.
Somebody asked a question on Twitter, and I'm questions people ask me on Twitter. We're going to try to answer in these podcasts. So let's just see what a good question is. There's a lot of good questions, so I'll just read some of these, and you could decide which one you want to answer. There's one is, how do you overcome a fear of failure? There's another one. What have you changed your mind about in the last few years and why? I've changed my mind about billions of things, but we could see if that's the one we want to answer today. What advice do you have for someone looking for funding to start a business? Best and worst podcast guest of all time. How can I build my reading culture because it's slowly dying? I don't know what they mean by culture there.
Maybe they feel like the book industry, but I feel like it's thriving. The book.
No. I think the problem is in a world that's glutted, it's attention glutted.
Yeah.
How do you find time to just sit down and read a book? Like
Yeah.
reading, I would say, is the single most valuable thing you can do for straight improving knowledge, wisdom, even experience, because you're absorbing the experience of the person you're reading from. So reading is such a valuable thing, and it's amazing to me. Like when I read a book, I not only have my own experience, I'm getting their entire life experience, and I'm like a mental vampire absorbing their life into mine. And I remember one time Stephen Dubner who co-wrote Freakonomics, we were talking, and I asked him, what percentage of a book do you think you remember? Because I was feeling like I don't remember a lot from books, and I thought maybe he would say like 20% or 10%. He said probably less than 1%. And so that made me think of something which has been very useful for me. So let's say there's very few good books. Like out of 1 million books, probably less than 100 are great. And it's almost like, it's not like a bell curve. It's more like the statistics around earthquakes.
Sure.
So earthquakes are always once in a million events. I bet you a good book is really like a once in a million event. And if you're only going to retain 1% of the books you read, instead of reading lots of books, you should reread the best books over and over. So that's what I tend to do, is I tend to reread lots of books. And I think that's a good way. Like if you find a book that's great,
100%.
and you're only going to remember 1% of it, should read it at least like 20 or 30 times to get 20 or 30% out of it, and take notes. And I try to write even mini articles. What did I learn from this book?
Well, I mean, I think when, one of the issues there is, okay, like if I read a book last week, I remember a lot of it, you know what I mean? I remember more than 1%. So it's a question of like the time, how much time has passed. I mean, I read, I was reading Chelsea Handler's book because, she's going to be coming on, and I remember a lot of it, obviously. I mean, and it's also different. I might remember less of Yuval Harari's book who had come on,
because his book's packed with
a lot
of facts. But I will say, I mean, so his books I have read more than once, all 3 of his books, and I do learn something each time. Particularly, Sapiens is still my favorite. I love Homo Deus and 21 Questions for the 21st Century, but Sapiens has so much knowledge and history I didn't know, like 70,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, and then he has such kind of interesting opinions how the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago wasn't as good for Homo sapiens as people think. We might even be less intelligent now as a result of the agricultural revolution, and his opinions on why is fascinating. But I kind of had to read and reread and have him on the podcast twice in order to get the full impact of that book.
But speaking of why you remember things and not, like Sapiens, the underlying theme is that humans as a group progress through storytelling. So I might remember Chelsea Handler's book because she's telling a lot of stories. She's telling about growing up, or, product of a Mormon Jewish background, or myriad of things about her life. I can remember them more readily because there's some coherence there to me, in contrast to other books that might be more technical.
Right. So that's another great point. And somebody asked here, how do you get better at storytelling? But what you're talking about is the importance of storytelling. If you really want to, have a lot of people read what you write or listen to what you're saying, and B, if you want to have an impact, and C, if you want people to, if you want your vision of the world to withstand the test of time, so that even 5 years from now, you're still a good selling book or podcast or movie or whatever, your ability to tell a story is really important. So Sapiens, he often would get in the minds of a Homo sapien in the year 40,000 BC. And I remember the questions he would ask, and it puts you in that time. Like, imagine before the discovery of Australia. I remember this specifically from the book. Who was standing on like the coast of Africa saying to themselves, I think I'm going to take a mediocre boat that has never gone more than a few miles and go 1,000 miles into the ocean, potentially off the side of the earth, and maybe I'll find a brand new continent. Because how far is Australia from Africa? It's like thousands of miles away. And somebody had to make that leap and say, hey, this is worth going 2,000 miles for
Right.
and discovering an entire continent. Who would have known that it was there? How did they even know it was there?
Right. Or they could have just been like, hey, let's go. And then they went 100 miles and 200 or 300. And
That's true. So
like
the
Columbus,
Micronesian, the Micronesian islands were
Yeah.
kind of discovered that way.
Yeah.
But also, then you have to make some guesses. Why did this person think that they can make it to
Right.
Australia or to any of these islands? Well, let's make some guesses. And this is we learned this from Michio Kaku. Like you
Yeah.
have some kind of situation or theory, and then you start being creative, curiously.
Yeah.
Your curiosity should lead you to some answers that you can explore. So maybe they were such good navigators then because they didn't have Google Maps and things like that they got really they understood birds' flying patterns or interesting things about the waves in the sea
Yeah.
that have that knowledge might have been lost by now because we don't need it anymore. And so they might have understood that, oh, there is something there. We just don't know where it is. It's far away, but we know it's there just based on
Yeah.
the flying. Like, where are these birds flying from?
Yeah.
They're flying from somewhere. And so, he starts guessing, but he's all the time telling stories from the point of view of someone who lived 40,000 years ago, which is around the time we discovered Australia.
But one thing I should say to that questioner and to most of the guests we've had here, what unifies them is curiosity, right? When you're talking about birds, I was just thinking about a Psychology Today piece I saw a couple weeks, where it said like birds sometimes like play, they're like dive bombing, and when you see groups of birds, and it makes you just start thinking like, not to read so passively, but to say, oh, I wonder how they did that, and to be active in it, and you're more likely to remember something the same way. You're more likely to appreciate money if you really worked for it or earned it rather than it was handed to you.
Yeah, that's a really good point that I think we learn in school. Okay, read this chapter because you're going to be tested on it tomorrow.
Yeah.
So you learn and you stay up all night and you wake up early. Like, did I remember all the facts? And then you get tested and then you forget all the facts and you forget everything you learned. Instead of being questioning like, well, what are the ways George Washington might not have been a good president?
Yeah,
Was the
sure.
Whiskey Rebellion, accurately reflecting what he promised to defend in the Constitution? I'm not saying one thing or the other. I don't
for
even know
sure.
what the
Yeah.
Whiskey Rebellion is really. But being curious about all these things we mindlessly read in textbooks, I think that ruins us for later reading.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, take Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah.
When I read this in high school, I thought it was the most boring book in the world. Like, I couldn't even read it.
Yeah.
It's a tiny novella, and it was so boring I couldn't read it. But now I read it at least once a year, if not more. I just read it even a few weeks
Wow.
ago because you ask yourself, why did he tell the story this way? Why did he use so few words? Why did he tell the story so sparingly? Why didn't the old man,
Yeah.
why did he, if he knew that the fish he was going to catch was going to probably be eaten by sharks by the time he got home, why was it important for him to battle this fish and potentially die and get drawn all the way out into the ocean? Like, you think of these things and it helps your ability to tell a story if you're analyzing, Old Man and the Sea. Most people don't know this. It's written at a 4th grade level. And I know this because if you Google the F-K score, the Fisher-Kincaid score, and you put in a piece of text into one of these FK score calculators,
that,
it will
yeah.
tell you the grade level that text was written at. And so I did this with all the text of Old Man and the Sea. It's written at a 4th grade level. And yet it's good enough that it won him the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
People think, oh, no, 4th grade level, that's not an intelligent book then. No, actually, that makes
It takes
the best.
more work, right?
Yeah.
And have you learned that in your writing where Einstein has always said, right? Like, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough.
Well, I always make sure whenever I write an article, the first draft, I always know before I publish it, I'm gonna eliminate at least 30% by the time I have a final draft.
Right.
So I don't publish it unless, and I count the words. I don't publish unless I know I've trimmed 30% because I
wow.
know the first draft I'm gonna have a lot of fat in the words
Yeah.
because I don't yet know really all the directions I'm gonna go. So I'm gonna go this direction, that
Yeah,
direction,
yeah.
and there's gonna be fat in there that I could take out or that won't be as interesting or that won't flow as well. And then you see this even in jokes. So Bill Burr, so Gary Goldman, who we had on the podcast recently, he talks about in his Goldman tips that he's doing on Twitter. These fabulous tips that he's doing about comedy, one a day for the entire year. And one of his tips is, really make sure, like, if you write down a joke, and you should write every day, is what he says. If you write down a joke, read it, in front of the mirror, or read it to your friends, read it to your voicemail, and then listen to it over and over and take out every spare word. And so Bill Burr, I saw him refer to this. So he's another well-known, famous comedian. He was talking about a bar where they had a kind of very inappropriate joke. And he said, he read the joke out loud, and he said, "That's a perfect joke." And I remember him, the joke itself's not that important, but I remember him saying, it's perfect joke because there is not an ounce of fat in that joke. If you take any word out of that joke, the joke fails. It has the exact number of words in it. And he was bringing up a different point, which is that the manager and the waitress in this bar got fired after putting that joke up, and he thought that was a horrible thing. But he said that this is a perfect joke. It should have stayed there. Like, obviously, it's a joke. Yeah. And but what impressed me more was his almost religious fascination with removing every single extra word.
Well, that's a Mark Twain quote, right? This letter would be shorter if I had more time. And it speaks to past podcast guest Cal Newport, where shallow work and deep work, and it's deeper work to cut out stuff, to get rid of what you don't need. But I'm wondering, it's, I'm sure people look at you, like anybody who does anything that's meritorious, like reading, or they'll look at you, and if you're inclined to look at it as aspirational, they're like, wow, James makes times for this, and James got all these businesses and podcasts and family and loved ones and comedy, and and if they don't like, you're like, wow, he just is, he walks.
This guy will do anything.
He walks 1 mile a month, and so of course he's got time. He's not running triathlons, so I think that's part of how you definitely not running triathlons. Not that I am either. But again, even a turtle looks fast moving past a rock compared to you.
About my
I'm Usain Bolt.
We use Usain Bolt as an example in the last podcast. Did I say his first name wrong?
Usain Bolt? Yeah, you might.
Maybe I said Usain.
Yeah, close enough. Everybody out there knows who the Jamaican sprinter is.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players, and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So, I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. So, reading culture, to answer that question, don't try to read any book. Find like the best books for you and then read and reread them. But I think reading is important every day. So just as an example, every day I read a book related to this podcast. So like, Steve, you mentioned you were reading Chelsea Handler's latest book. So I'm reading that as well because she's coming on the podcast. I also read a nonfiction book for me. So that's why I was reading. We talked about it last time. I was reading the book, The Formula.
That's amazing.
About his kind of mathematical laws of success. And I had just finished also The Talent Code, which was related to that by Daniel Coyle, which we always talk
Daniel
about.
will have to get you here one of these days.
Yeah, and then I always read fiction, because fiction is almost by definition going to be the best writing. And the reason is because if you're writing about, let's say you're writing about how to be a great salesman, it's because you've spent your life being a good salesman, not being a good writer. So you won't be the best writer of a book about being a good salesman, even though it might be a good book. So for people who are aspiring writers and storytellers, you need to read good quality fiction, because those are the people who spent the 10,000 hours writing well. Like, they devoted their life to writing well, as opposed to being a great salesman or a great tennis player or a great scientist or whatever. So even like
you think the quality of fiction writing is by definition better than
the quality of good, like anything,
Yeah.
you have to only look
Yeah.
at the best. So
Yeah.
there's more bad fiction writing than 99% of fiction
Yeah.
writing, let's just say, is bad, and 1% is
Yeah.
really good. If you read that 1% or that 1/10 of 1%, and even read it over and over, like my favorite fiction book, I've probably read over 300 times. I read from it at least once a week since 1994. And then for every fiction book that I love, I constantly, I mean, like we had James Frey
Yeah.
on the podcast. His book, A Million Little Pieces, I've probably read that 20 times.
Both fiction and nonfiction.
Right. Well, it was it was scandalous
Yeah,
for being
two for the price of one.
But that was
Yes.
every kind of time in history has its BS moment, and
Yeah.
of course, a memoir has fictional elements of it. Every memoir
Like
on
a
the planet has fictional elements.
Green
of it.
Book it just won the Oscars, and
Yeah,
you
the
know.
Bohemian Rhapsody, the movie.
Yeah, had like
probably
many-
50% fiction.
yeah.
So even though it was a great movie, I love the movie. I've
Don't
watched
let
the movie
facts
twice.
get in the way of a good story. Don't let facts get
Right.
in the way.
Don't
of
let
a
the
good
facts get
story.
away in the good story, because the point of the story is not the facts, but all the other things you learn. No
by
one
the
remembers
way-
the facts anyway.
And as part of a podcast bonus, James will sing Bohemian Rhapsody for you.
I don't think so, but I could break
Okay,
dance.
fine.
I could break dance for this podcast.
Okay, fine.
Because
Sorry.
no one will see
So
that.
sing "We Are the Champions," which is a very good song. By the
Yeah,
way.
all their
Anthem.
songs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and we've talked about we haven't talked on air, but because you're a genuinely curious person, we were talking in the car in Los Angeles about what makes an anthem.
Right, and Queen, they actually refer to this in the movie.
Yeah.
that they're making too many anthems.
Right.
They were like self-critical, like everything
Must
we
have been
make is an
getting
anthem.
popcorn.
But like We Are the Champions, and the one
We
that
Will
goes
Rock
next
You.
to yeah, We Will Rock You, or
Yeah.
or anthems.
Yeah.
And then the song that they made to contest to be different
Yeah.
was Another One Bites the Dust.
Yeah.
But that's an anthem. I
100%.
would say that's an anthem. They were saying it
100%.
wasn't in the movie.
Yeah,
But,
there definitely is an anthem.
but we could do the anthem thing another
exactly.
podcast. I've now
And-
totally forgotten my.
Okay, no, you were talking about how most fiction, everything has its BS moment. You were talking about James Fry and A Million Little Pieces.
Oh yeah, just
Yeah.
that. Who cares that?
Yeah.
It's still good writing. If you want to be a great writer, read good writing. But here's what I wanted to bring up about
Yeah.
facts. Because you said don't let a good story get in the way of the facts. When I was doing stand up here a few weeks ago, I was talking a little bit about college and the facts, and I asked everybody in the audience. There's about 120 people in the audience. I asked them, who was the president before Abraham Lincoln, and nobody. I'm not being critical of the audience, by the way. Nobody knew, which I get it. Nobody knows. Nobody remembers facts from high school unless they continue to follow it. But one person even shouted out George Washington was the
Yeesh.
president right before Abraham Lincoln.
Yeesh.
And I said, "Are you from the U.S.?" And she said, "Yes." And again, I wasn't judging. Like, that's the state of education, whether you're in high school or college or whatever. But reading afterwards and being curious, again, helps you overcome. Like James Buchanan was the president before Abraham Lincoln. People should know because A, he was one of the most important people in the world. B, certainly the Civil War was critical on who was the president, right? So if you know anything about the war with the highest percentage death toll of U.S. citizens was the Civil War.
Yeah.
This is the guy was not caused by him, but he was president for the 4 years leading up to the Civil War. Is critical in this pivotal moment in U.S. history, and he was probably the first and maybe only gay president the U.S. had. Not openly gay, but most likely he was gay. So it's an interesting fact about him. That's an interesting story. And
what made you bring it up in your comedy routine?
Because I was making a joke about how everybody always wants to know what their purpose in life is. So here's a guy who he must have from an early age thought his purpose in life was to lead one of the most important countries in the world. And he achieved his dream. He achieved his goals in life. He became everyone when they were little kids, like, I'm going to be president of the United States. He did it. He was the one little kid who grew up and became president of the United States of America. And now nobody, 150 years later.
Yeah, interesting.
And he was also arguably one of the most important in terms of historical figures. Because, again, the most important war in U.S. history comes from his term. And Not a single person, which is very odd for 120. Not a single person knew his name, and so what is my point there was, and I was telling a joke about my daughter asking, how do I find my purpose in life? My point to her was just be happy
Yeah.
because here's a guy who had a purpose, achieved his dreams, achieved his passions, achieved his goals, and nobody knew who he was
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah, no, for sure, and I think it speaks to. I know we both saw the Bill Murray documentary, and you and Jay did that great, how to be like Jerry, why I want to be like Bill Murray, which echoed some of the similar points in that documentary. But the filmmakers were essentially talking about how Bill Murray, evokes like an ethos of like it doesn't matter, like it doesn't matter fame or this, and
Well, one thing
yeah,
they didn't mention in the documentary, which I think is really important. So yes, we saw this documentary, and it was all
yeah,
about. It's the stories of Bill Murray. I think the documentary was called, and it was all about how not Bill Murray's movies, but how Bill Murray does these crazy surprise things out of
yeah.
nowhere, and it just brings joy to all these people's
Yeah,
lives.
it was a lot better than I thought it was going to be.
For
Like,
instance,
when you
he'll
told me
just
to watch it, I was like, yeesh.
well,
Yeah.
for instance, he'll just go like somebody's having like a party in their apartment. He'll just like walk into the apartment and start serving beer to everyone, and just like be as if he's
Yeah.
like the regular guy hanging out with them. Or he'll go up to somebody in the bathroom who's peeing,
Yeah.
put his hands around the guy's eyes, and say to them, "No one is going to believe that when you tell
Right.
them about this." So he would just do all these funny, quirky things, and that has created more value for his life than his movies. That's what
Yeah.
the documentary was about. But one thing they forgot to mention is I think the reason why he's able to do this and also why he's able to be the way he is in movies and why he's so successful is he once said, there's a famous quote by him. He said, "I'm going to live my life as if I'm incredibly wealthy. I'm going to live every
Right.
moment as if I'm incredibly wealthy." He said this when he was
Oh,
dirt poor
wow.
and
Wow.
nothing, and he then did live his life that way, and kind of doing that while you don't have any money. So it's not like he could go out and buy a plane.
Yeah.
So a lot of people get incredibly wealthy and they buy a plane or they buy
Right.
a big house or whatever. He couldn't do any of these things. He could only be, he could only act. He could only use this
Yeah.
imaginary wealth in his actions, and so it's as if he was buying himself this ability to not care what people thought, and he had to focus on that because he couldn't buy material things.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so that built up this
Which speaks
persona.
to the idea of like it's easier to act your way into a way of thinking than think your way into a way of acting.
Wait. Is it easier to act your way?
Into
Yes.
a way, and to like
Act your way into a way of thinking as opposed to think your way into a way of acting. So you can't tell yourself what? To give you an
you
example.
can't say, "Hey, I'm gonna get the courage to go in the boxing ring and start boxing." It's easier to do it, and then it's easier to say, "Oh, I'm gonna spend months trying to get up on stage," and to do it, it's easier to get up on stage, and then
Right.
which you would know a lot better than I do, which I commend you.
And it's
even
scary.
when days people aren't slapping their knees and falling over their chair.
What are you talking about? Every time I go up, I would say you haven't
No,
been to
you were
my-
good. No, I swear, you were good. I tell people all the time.
I just was in LA before doing
But I'm
comedy.
saying not
and-
every day is Purim. Like some days it's some days you're the windshield, some days you're the bug, some days you're drinking wine, some days you're crushing grapes. For every comedian, Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle will tell you.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
all I'm saying.
And it's interesting because the very first time I did stand up, I mean, I had done public speaking in sort of a stand up style for a while, but the very first time I did actual stand up where your job is to go up there and make people laugh, as opposed to your job, like public speaking, your job is to go up there and talk about something that people want to hear about. And then you can make jokes and people laugh. And even if it's a stand up style, it's still not quite stand up because the audience is pleasantly surprised that you're making them laugh. But in stand up, there's no purpose to the being up there except to make people laugh.
Yeah.
And so Stephen Dubner, again, co-writer of Freakonomics, and we were doing this podcast for a while called Question of the Day, and we challenged ourselves. We're going to do stand up. We're going to do it at the same time in a performance, and we gave ourselves 6 minutes each. And I was scared to death, but I did not want, and I know he was scared, but I did not want to be the one to back out.
Wow.
and he didn't want to be the one to back out. So we did it. And then I realized, oh, okay, that was possible. And then another time I wanted to get better at just doing one-liners. And so I challenged myself to do stand-up on a subway so that all you can do, you don't have time to do anything but one-liners. And also everyone's going to hate you anyway. So that was scary. I even got on the subway and I told the person taking video, forget it, we're just going to ride the subway for a little while. But then I said, you know what though? And this actually speaks to your point in a way I didn't realize. I told this person, you know what? Just turn on the camera. And as soon as you turned on the camera, I started doing stand-up.
Wow.
And so the action made me do it. If I had just like kept thinking myself into doing it, I never would have done it.
No, and you also had like an accountability partner in the case of, and that's what you need, and that's what I'm grateful to people who are in my life who want you to do things that are going to help you and get you out of your comfort zone and do things. And it made me think, and that brings us back to one of the questions on Twitter about fear, and I remember seeing, where the people, I was listening to something where they were saying, if you procrastinate to some degree, it's a lack of self-confidence, right? You don't think that you're going to have good results, so you're putting it off. But if you think if you're going to have good results, you're more likely to take action. It could be anything. Hey, let me wait till I ask this person out till I lose 10 pounds, or let me wait till I do this. And, so it is a lack. So if you, in fear, maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point. I don't think that explains all procrastination, but let's run with that for a second. Well, in the last podcast, I talked a lot about my first real job, which was at HBO. But for a long time, I was afraid to apply because I literally thought I needed to publish a novel first so that people would like me and I could work in the entertainment industry. Finally, I just applied and they accepted me. And I didn't have a novel published.
Right.
So not taking actions, but thinking some erroneous or bad thing cost me 2 years, of I can't judge if I wasted time or not, but I could have maybe started there 2 years earlier than I did. But
people who could deal with failure, they're not as concerned by the outcomes, right?
But I think but to add to that,
and
I'm always interrupting you, Steve. I apologize.
Yeah, I quit.
To add to that, I don't like to do something unless there is a fear component. So, for instance, why publish something why publish an article if you're not afraid of what people will think? Because if you publish something where people are all going to love it, they're already thinking it. Then somebody's already written it. If everybody's already thinking it, you have to be afraid of something to do something. So for instance, a couple of weeks ago, John Borromeo, who works here at Stand Up New York, he said to me, "You want to go on this lineup at the Mailroom downtown?" And I said, "Sure." Who's performing? And he told me, TJ Miller, who's been on the podcast, one of my favorite comedians, was performing. And he said, "Do you want to go on before or do you want to go on after TJ Miller?" Now, before would be a lot easier because the audience wouldn't have just been overwhelmed by this great comedian. After is very difficult.
Yeah.
Because he will, as they say, he will have destroyed the crowd. He would be so good and he was the best guy in the lineup by far. He would have annihilated the crowd, and it would be very hard to follow. So I said, I'm going to follow him because that was the direction where was the most fear.
Wow.
And since I want to get better at stand-up comedy, and there's so few opportunities to do it, like it's not like you can go on stage, get off, and then go back on, then get off and go back on. There's so few opportunities to get better, and there's very few opportunities where I'm going to follow a great comedian.
Yeah.
I have to do the path that's the most fearful. That's the only way you're going to get better is by being afraid. So acknowledging that every time you're afraid, you're not afraid of if you're afraid of a lion, run away. But if the fear is like, I really want to do this, but I'm afraid, that is the signal that you have to do it.
Yeah, I was also I'm a big consumer of a lot of this stuff, but I think. I remember we had Charlemagne the God on, and he talked about his book on anxiety. And I also realized, I think I've always been an anxious person. And I think a lot of it's how you perceive it. And anxiety could be a sign of okay, those are things that matter to you, so you should focus more.
Right. So for instance, let's say there's a woman you really
Yeah.
like and you want to call her up and ask her on a date.
Yeah.
Obviously, everybody is scared in that situation. That fear should tell you
The love
you
Dr.
like this
James.
person enough
Yes.
that you need to call her, and you need to get better at dealing with that kind of fear so you can make those kind of calls in the future when you really like something or when something's really important to you.
Or make a mixtape.
Which probably won't work. Or again with Gary Goldman, who's been on this podcast 3 times, and in one of his Goldman tips about comedy, he says every time you go up, you should be at least 20% of your set, you should be working on something. So you shouldn't just make it easy for yourself. Always be challenging yourself and working on something. So, again, how do you overcome the fear of fear? You should be excited about fear. And every day you should even ask yourself, what am I going to do today that is going to be a little bit scary? Not necessarily starting a business, maybe a small thing. Maybe I'm going to talk to a stranger, or maybe I'm going to, here's one, ask, when I next time I go to Starbucks, I'm going to ask the cashier for 10% off my coffee.
Sure.
Which is a scary thing, by the way. Like, people are afraid to do it.
Yes, and I also think there's a distinction between scary and dangerous, right? Things are
don't do anything dangerous, but a lot more things are scary than are dangerous.
100%.
Like turbulence on a plane.
Yeah.
Okay, it's usually not dangerous. Very few planes ultimately crash. But everyone is terrified of turbulence. And I was terrified. I was terrified of flying because I would just think to myself, I'm going to die every time there's turbulence. And so I completely changed my mindset. Every time there was turbulence, I would literally think to myself, this is fantastic. Maybe this plane might be crashing like on the TV show Lost, and I'm going to end up on the island of Lost.
With Evangeline Lilly.
It was, all Jack, Kate, Sawyer, Jacob. It's a magical island. Amazing things happen there. And I want to go. It's my favorite TV show. I've watched that whole series 4 times. I want to go to the island of Lost. And you know what? My fear of turbulence completely ended. It was like magic. It ended. Like, I actually enjoy turbulence now.
Wow, that's good. Exciting.
Try it.
Yes. I thought you were going to say you sing spirituals when you hear turbulence.
No, but I
sing
really,
Amazing Grace.
I start imagining myself like crawling up onto the beach like they did
That's so funny.
And who knows? And but okay, that was
I think we're trying to do the 35.
We're trying to do the half-hour podcast. I don't know if we did it or not, but we sort of answered a couple of questions, and we're going to do more of these. We got some really good questions, but at least one episode a week will be Steve and me, and maybe some others, and alongside our usual episodes with great and amazing peak performers in all areas of life. And I hope everyone enjoyed it. Give us a tweet if you enjoyed it, or follow us on Instagram. Steve has not done any social media, so it's this little.
I'm getting out of my comfort zone.
Steve's
I'm
afraid
of it.
You're afraid of getting on social media for some reason.
And again,
you're not very social.
No, but what you resist will persist. We all have to get out of our comfort zone. So I'm doing it, and I'm excited. And I think, like, what I say to myself is, don't compare your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 20. Like I've said to James, comparison is a thief of joy. Like, embrace the getting more followers. Right now, I probably will only have 3 followers.
Wait, what you resist, you'll...
What you resist will persist.
What you resist will persist.
Yes.
And if you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always gotten.
Yes.
Thanks very much, Steve. End of podcast.
Awesome. Thank you. That was good too, right?
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.